Welcome to Media Empires, where we sit down with the most influential media creators right now to learn exactly how they built their empires. Our aim is to extract the secrets of top-tier podcasters, newsletter authors, and media creators who are breaking the old rules for media success. Whether you're looking to start your own empire or simply curious about the nuts and bolts behind media businesses, you'll find valuable insights and tactics in each episode. Grab your headphones, let's dive in.
This week on Media Empires, I'm joined by Tyler Denk, the co-founder and CEO of Beehive. Tyler breaks down how he came to be a part of building two media empires, Morning Brew and Beehive, a newsletter publishing platform, which just raised a $33 million Series B. In the conversation, we dive deep into the monetization potential of newsletters, the significance of email marketing, ad networks, fundraising considerations, and success stories in the newsletter industry.
Well, Tyler, welcome to Media Empires. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Pumped to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Tyler, here we interview people who've built media empires. You've built two media empires. You've been part of Morning Brew and now Beehive. For those who are unfamiliar, why don't you give a brief background of how you came to be a part of not one, but two media empires?
One, I'll take partial credit. And then the other one, we are still early days, but hopefully well on our way to building a media empire, or actually facilitating other people to build their own media empires. I think is a better way to spin it. Back when I graduated college, I had like a failed startup that I was working on and moved back at home with my parents, was doing freelance gigs with just any company that would hire me to do like software related work. And I caught up with Austin Reef, who is one of the co-founders of Morning Brew. And we were chatting on the phone for like an hour and a half. And he was obsessed with Barstool at the time and the fact that a lot of their revenue came from merch drops. I think they still do a ton of merch, but at the time they were doing like a merch drop every bit of news, like every week. And one of my specialties of my freelance work was Shopify websites. And so Austin's like, if you have any free time, like would love to like build a Shopify website to sell Morning Brew merch. And so that was kind of like the initial impetus into like working with Morning Brew. And then it became building, I was the only engineer on their team at the time. So then it became building the referral program, building social share icons. And one thing led to another. And I was like on contract, but doing like 50, 60 hours of work a week. And eventually he asked me to join the company full time. So that was kind of my early days of the Morning Brew experience.
And then you eventually became CTO, right?
No, never got the CTO title, okay. But like for a while,
effectively,
it was weird because I always had like this chip on my shoulder. I'm like totally self-taught software developer, which anyone who's self-taught knows that means like you doubt pretty much everything that you do. So Here I was like 22, 23, and I was like not CTO, but I was like either the only engineer for the first 18 months or leading a team of 2 to 3 other engineers who were like actually trained in school with internships. And I'm just like totally self-taught, winging it, doing what I think works, kind of like the Wild West. And so I led engineering. I was the most senior engineer while I was there, but never officially like CTO.
Yeah. And we're going to get to Beehive in a minute, but first talk a little bit about, we've had Austin and Alex on the show as well, but talk about what you think the innovation that Morning Brew really had, like what caused Morning Brew to break out. And then I want to talk about like the evolution of how they've evolved their business.
Yeah. So if you have had Austin and Alex, you're already aware of like kind of the founding story and how it started with Alex just at University of Michigan, kind of creating like a PDF. I think it was the Market Corner, sending it to a few different friends and then more students, and then would start going to different classrooms and getting more signups. I think we use it to our advantage a lot in the early days. One of the big things that we said is none of us are from media. And where typically when you would go and start a media company, you would try to go to people who had a journalism background or like some experience building a media company. And I actually think our advantage in the early days was our writer was not a journalist. Our growth team didn't build previous media entities. The execs and co-founders didn't come from a media background. And so it really was like first principle, like what do our users and our readers want to receive from Morning Brew? And like, how do we serve them and do it in a way that is better and more intuitive than the other solutions? Other solutions being going to like a Yahoo Finance or CNBC, or paying a ton of money through your organization to access the Bloomberg terminal and everything else. And those were kind of like the incumbent legacy media players in the type of news that we were covering. And Medium was still, it's weird to say nascent because it's not like peak newsletter where we kind of like are transitioning into now, but the skim came before us. But newsletter wasn't really like the medium that people were chasing. So it was sit in front of your TV and watch CNBC for 30 minutes in the morning, or receive Morning Brew and have all of the top business news sent to you in a digestible email that's written in like a fun and familiar tone. And that really was like our differentiation.
That totally makes sense in terms of the start. How about in terms of the evolution, in terms of going to all these different business verticals or going across formats? How do you make sense of how the business has evolved?
Yeah, I think for a lot of the media companies, there's like a few different routes. There is just go for scale, which is kind of what we did with the primary newsletter, which when I joined, we were at like 100,000 subscribers. When I left in 2020, right around the acquisition, it was about 3 to 4 million subscribers. So we achieved kind of like the scale, which is general business news and kind of current events. And then the other approach that you see with like an industry dive and a lot of other media properties is like, how do we go like B2B or like vertical specific? And it's just kind of understanding what are the CPMs, what is your business model essentially, and how can you extract more revenue from your audience? When you are general business, it is very broad. We have people who are students, who are teachers, who work in finance, who work in the medical field, but just want to be up to date with like business news and current events. And what you get from that is like a bunch of people who don't have a ton in common. And because it is so general, yes, they're engaged. Yes, they skew younger. Yes, they are consuming information from an email newsletter. But the CPMs are lower just because it is more of a general audience versus when you go B2B and go into like healthcare or human resources or any like more specific vertical. One, you have less people reading the newsletter and consuming the content, but they're a much more valuable audience to the type of advertisers who want to get in front of that audience because you have 100,000 people in human resources. So the CPMs are different. And then also like events, like we try to do a lot of different events at Morning Brew, but again, like because there isn't that much that these people had in common outside of the fact that they read Morning Brew as like a business newsletter that's pretty general purpose. It was hard to like build the perfect event. But if you were building an event from people in the medical field, human resources, the space industry, like who wants to sponsor that event becomes much more clear. And like the type of offerings and things that you can do at an event like that make a lot more sense. So I think that's like the other business model that a lot of media companies go into is very vertical specific, higher CPMs, higher concentration of the target audience, and being able to serve almost like working backwards from like, who is our ideal advertiser and how do we build a sustainable business, and then find the vertical and people who would kind of fill that vertical.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you had to guess, in the next 5 to 10 years, like what does Morning Brew look like at scale?
Yeah, hard to say because I'm now like 3.5 years removed from like any important decision that I've ever made at that company. So hard to get a pulse of exactly where they're going. I know they tried the education piece, which back when I started in 2017, that was actually like a big like focus of ours. It didn't exist yet, but something that we were kind of working our way up to is we have people who skew younger in their career, but are very motivated to learn and understand what's going on in the business world. How can we serve them and educate them with courses, whether it's kind of like an alternative MBA or finance or anything else that you could use in the workforce that kind of stems from reading information and being up to date in current events with business news. So education was like a core pillar then, which they have experimented with since. They can continue to go vertical, right? So do they do a crypto newsletter, an AI newsletter, a space newsletter? Each one of those verticals has events and courses and resources and a paid newsletter behind it is like another approach. Do they also just go after making the core asset, which is the daily newsletter that goes to 4 or 5 million people a day, larger, more useful, and more of a top of funnel for everything else? If I had to guess, the answer is probably all of the above. They have, I think, 250 some employees now. So there's a lot going on at the company, but can't sit here and truthfully say like I know what's going on in terms of like key decision making. I've been gone since 2020.
Yeah. Let's segue into Beehive. So at the time that you start Beehive, it's not like you're the first mover in this space, right? There's already other sort of platforms that have achieved some scale. So how did you get the conviction that, hey, this is a big opportunity?
Yeah, so I think the Beehive story comes in like many different parts. There is starting with Morning Brew, which was obviously the impetus for a lot of it. I was 22, super naive, and like kind of making vendor decisions for Morning Brew as a company. A lot of the current CMS and offerings were for web first properties because most of media was built on WordPress and different websites, where we felt fundamentally different because we were an email first media publication, which told us like a lot of the available solutions in market weren't going to serve us the way that we wanted them. And so I kind of made the naive, I can build anything type decision of rather than buying all of these different software vendors, let's just build our own solutions in house. So we built our own website from scratch. We built our own email templates. We built a content management system that the writers would use to actually create the stories, reorganize them, style them, and drop them into a newsletter. So that was totally homegrown tech that we had built. And then we also built an ad management platform where the brand partnerships team and the copywriting team would basically be able to manage the inventory of all of the different ad placements across the ecosystem of newsletters. They would get approved by the advertiser. They would slide into the CMS. They would slide into the email, and then they would be sent out. And then we'd report back to the advertisers. So like kind of long way of saying everything we built was totally in-house for us and custom built. And it worked so well in the sense that when we would speak to other, even larger, more notable media organizations, they were always asking us what vendors we were using or what our processes were. And the answer were that it was totally custom built. And what that unlocked for us was I would sit next to the writing team and Neil, the managing editor, would be like, hey, it'd be really nice if we could style this thing or like format this differently. And if you were using a vendor, that meant talking to their product team or your account manager, getting it on the roadmap for 2 to 3 months. And then hopefully they launch something that your team could use. For us, it meant me saying, yeah, I can build that today and I'll have it ready for you tomorrow. And so the pace of iteration to be able to listen to what the writers wanted to create these emails and just build it that day. Same with the content team, same with the brand partnerships, same with copywriting, same with the growth team. I kind of saw the advantages of the homegrown custom built solution in real time. So that was like, I'd say impetus one. The second thing that happened was a lot of readers were either hobbyists who had their own newsletters, worked at other media companies, or worked at a business who was also sending email newsletters. And they would always reach out asking, what software do you use? What referral program are you utilizing? How do you make your emails look so good in Outlook, for example? And what each of those people wanted was us to recommend the vendor that we were using, but what we were using was our own custom solution, which was frustrating for them to hear, but showed me as the person who made those decisions and built that software that there was something that we had built that is uniquely interesting to other people who are sending email newsletters for their business or hobby or organization. So that was kind of like the second data point. And then the third was right around the time, I think in 2020-ish, when Substack raised their $65 million Series B, around the same time that Axios had got acquired, or the Skim just raised a ton of money. The Hustle just got acquired by HubSpot. And so there was kind of a moment of newsletters becoming more of a thing that organizations and businesses and media companies were prioritizing, or that hobbyists and journalists were depending on to reach their audience, monetize them directly, or build a business around that top of funnel instrument in a newsletter. And so all of those kind of coming together, and Morning Brew getting acquired and kind of being like the golden child of like email newsletters, done really well and scaled very quickly. I kind of felt like I was the right person with that experience who had already built the software and tools to facilitate a lot of that growth. And then just the other signals in the market and from our readers that there was like a real opportunity to build a solution there. It was kind of those three things that came together and kind of made it a no-brainer to pursue building a solution here.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like perfect founder market fit and timing.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey, everybody. If you don't already subscribe to the Media Empires newsletter, you should. But that's not what I'm here to tell you about. The platform we use to power this and other Turpentine newsletters is called Beehive, and it's excellent. First of all, it was started by the same early team who helped build Morning Brew into a $75 million newsletter business. And And they built Beehive to offer that same powerful functionality to anyone sending emails. From essayists to business owners, the platform is beautiful, their text editor is intuitive, and they help you scale your audience with custom growth features. Beehive has powerful tools to help you monetize your content. You can easily launch paid subscriptions or pursue an advertising model. The Beehive platform will even connect you to premium brands to sponsor your newsletter. Not only do we use them, but thousands of the top newsletters in the world also use them, like Milk Road, Blockworks, Newsletter Operator, and so many more. Beehive's founder hooked up Media Empires listeners with a sweet deal. Get 20% off for 3 months with code EMPIRES. Visit beehiiv.com, that's BEEHIIV.com, to get started. Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at erikaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.
I noticed Beehive first when I saw people like Sean in the Milk Road choosing to opt. It feels like the serious writers, in terms of the serious people who are trying to build serious business people who are trying to really optimize for growth, optimize for their business as opposed to just a hobby. We're choosing Beehive. What have you found in terms of what's been the most effective way to convince writers who are maybe on other platforms? Like what was the feature set, or what was the argument that got them to either choose Beehive or to switch over?
Yeah, I'll take a step back and say what the solution we kind of went to market with. When describing the setup of what we had built at Morning Brew and it all being custom built, previous to building something totally custom like that, it was actually 7 or 8 different solutions or software vendors that teams had to kind of piece together. And so typically people would launch a website on WordPress or Webflow. If they were sending an email newsletter on top of their content and website, they would also copy and paste it into like MailChimp. You'd be surprised how many large media organizations are still copy and pasting content into like a MailChimp template, but it happens. If you wanted a growth tool like a referral program, there's a third-party software for that. If you wanted audience development data and understanding who is subscribing, where are they coming from, what's like the LTV, there's a separate data tool that you can extract data from the email platform and sync it to that. If you wanted premium subscriptions and be able to monetize your audience directly, you could integrate Stripe or Memberful or kind of build your own user authentication and billing. And then if you wanted an ad network, you can use like a third-party pixel that you drop into your email template and kind of monetize like with earning fractions of a penny per click. And very quickly, you realize I just named 6 or 7 totally different pieces of software that as an individual or a hobbyist, you had to piece together yourself, or as a team that might not have a ton of engineering density, you would have to figure out how to integrate them all seamlessly into your team's processes. And so the solution of what we launched with Beehive really was kind of a Morning Brew in a box, but tying together 6 to 7 disparate pieces of software into one simple platform that makes it easy to launch a beautiful website, that also publish a newsletter at the same time, charge your audience directly for premium subscriptions, have ad placements from premium sponsors like HubSpot or Monday.com dropped into your newsletter. So kind of like the total package of what we had built at Morning Brew is what we offered kind of day one with Beehive. So that was the initial go-to-market and pitch. And there had been other competitors that did pieces of that, but not the total package. And to answer your question more directly, in the earliest days of like any startup, the platform and the product is as bad as it will ever be. So there's other ways that you have to figure out how to win. And there were 2 for us. One is just reputation and like what you had done previously. And so that was leaning as much as we could into, we had just built Morning Brew. It's me and my 2 co-founders were 2 software engineers at Morning Brew. We know what it takes to build a massively successful email newsletter. And we are rebuilding that software, but better for anyone to take advantage of. And that was the story and narrative that we went to market with. And then the other lever was price. And so we have been grossly underpriced since the beginning. And that is somewhat intentional because at the beginning, our platform was worse than a lot of the other platforms as we were building out this vision. So that's where we won a lot of users. And then to answer the final part of your question of how did we continue to acquire users like the Milk Road, and where are we finding the type of people who would want to use our software? Our best growth mechanism, like we have total faith in the software and the platform doing what it's supposed to do and working really well. It is case studies of people who have used our software and grown and monetized and got acquired and have built a case study in themselves, built on the backs of our software, which is the biggest selling point. And so Sean and Milk Road, they joined, I think, January of 2022 with no subscribers, no content, no website, nothing. And they got acquired for nearly 8 figures 10 months later, built on our referral program, built with our website, built with our email newsletter templates, built on top of our data. Granted, they also put some paid spend behind it, and they have their own channels that they leverage as well. But showing that it's possible to go from zero to acquisition in 10 months, not needing 8 different pieces of software, but just our solution that we built, really is the promise of like the Morning Brew in a box that we built. And so it's success stories like that that spawn additional users that take notice and try the platform.
So you mentioned before we were chatting, I think a little bit over 40 employees. You're under 2 years in. You've raised a bunch of money. You have a bunch of traction. What would you define as kind of the biggest inflection points in the company? Sort of the moments where things turned up a notch, so to speak, in terms of your traction or growth or progress.
Yeah. So right now we're 65 employees globally, about 45, 50 in the US, 15, 20 international, doing a little bit over $1 million a month in revenue is like where we currently are. There wasn't like a 0 to 1 step function. I'd say like we weren't like struggling and then this happened and it totally changed everything. Nor has it been like a total rocket ship. It's been like pretty linear growth, I'd say, from the beginning, which is just blocking and tackling. Speaking from like a very product oriented and software person, there are certain inputs that we receive when we are trying to acquire new users or when we're losing users. So whenever someone churns, figuring out why they churned, if it's a lack of a function or feature, then that becomes the number one priority to build that to prevent future churn. Whenever we're talking to other users who we want to use the platform and they put up XYZ reason why they can't switch over from a HubSpot or MailChimp or whatever, then like those features become our number 1, 2, and 3 feature to build to then attract those users. And so it really is like blocking and tackling in its purest form of like how we are growing and expanding the market. The Milk Road story is a sample inflection point, I'd say, because it really was like going from absolutely zero to a large acquisition built on the backs of software in the medium of an email newsletter shows you, one, that it's possible, 2, that newsletters are extremely valuable and like great as an asset and can be a business, and that our software and platform can facilitate that type of growth and monetization. So I'd say that is one of the inflection points. Another one, we launched the ad network about a little bit less than a year ago. The ad network is a bet that when Substack launched with the vision of anyone can monetize their audience directly via premium subscriptions, which you can also do on Beehive, my initial reaction in seeing the success of Morning Brew and the acquisition of The Hustle and Axios was, yes, that's incredibly empowering for journalists and writers and publishers to monetize their audience directly. And I think that is a very viable business model for a lot of people. But I don't think enough publishers or writers can justify charging $10, $15, $20 a month for subscription revenue. But the tried and true way to monetize your content on the internet for decades has been advertising, whether banner ads on blogs or direct sponsorships. And seeing how successful Morning Brew was at understanding their audience and being able to work with brands that want to get in front of this very specific audience, we figured that building a 2-sided ad marketplace where we have brands, like I mentioned earlier, directly investing tens of thousands of dollars into the Beehive ad ecosystem to get in front of thousands of quality newsletters. Inversely, as a writer, you have access to inventory right now. I think we have between 40 and 50 live campaigns of different advertisers where you can select different ads. Right now, it's primarily CPC based, but we're launching CPM pretty soon, and be able to just focus on what you're best at doing, which is creating content, knowing that you can just in one click add a premium sponsorship to your newsletter and get paid out automatically a few weeks later. So that's like been another huge inflection point for us. Really just, it's kind of like, I don't know who said the quote, but like earning your first dollar on the internet, like how life-changing that is in what was previously a very high barrier to entry to be able to monetize something like an email newsletter. And we have solved the cold start problem of being able to monetize in 3 different manners. I think it's extremely powerful for the long tail of content creators and newsletters to monetize, and super legitimate to have these types of brands at the top of your newsletter.
Totally. So I selfishly want to ask you for advice. I do this on every Media Empires episode. So we Turpentine, as you know, is like something like industry dive for podcasts, right? We have about 20 podcasts. They're for different enterprise buyers like CFOs or heads of HR or different sectors like AI or sort of climate tech, or we have a healthcare show coming on too. And we think naturally we should be in the newsletter game as well, right? We, at the very least, we should be collecting emails. That's a no-brainer. But we haven't figured out kind of what's the right approach yet on the newsletter side. We could be just, hey, here's like a lightly edited version of the podcast, and it's sort of, per like on an individual podcast level. We could do sort of a macro. Here's like the best of what's happening on the network. We could do something even more ambitious. If you were us, I'm putting you on the spot here, and you don't know, a ton about our business, not obviously because you're not in the weeds in it, but how would you advise us thinking about it, given your knowledge on newsletters and what does well?
Yeah, I think a perfect case study that I love to quote is, I think Colin and Samir and Publish Press do like an excellent job with how they manage podcast, YouTube channel, and newsletter. I'd say there's like different levels to it. Some are, I don't know if lazy is the right word. Some are easier and less work to be able to pull off successfully. So I'd say like on easy mode, it is, we are already doing a podcast or we are already doing a YouTube video. Can I synthesize that, whether it's a transcript or just like my 5 takeaways from this YouTube video or podcast, put in an email. Now that's top of funnel. You send that out with a link to whatever the final call to action is, whether it's the YouTube channel or the podcast episode itself. That is like, I'd say like level 1 of like, why not collect the emails when people are on your website and be able to distribute? Because even my favorite podcast, like I'm not on top of when new episodes are dropping all the time, right? So you're at least like, for people who don't have the time to listen or watch, they get the top 5 insights. And then you can also send them to the full episode if you've piqued their interest. So that's like level 1. What Colin and Samir do is it's tangential content. So it's not like they did a video or a podcast and just kind of synthesize that exact same point or takeaway and put it in email form. Rather, their Published Press newsletter, I'm pretty sure it's 3 times a week, and it's just business stories in the creator economy space that is relevant to anyone who would also be interested in their podcast. And they'll also plug the podcast and YouTube channel and other things throughout the newsletter. So it's not a repeat of the same content in a different medium. It is net new content, but serves the same end user. So I'm sure they have plenty of people like me who I read their newsletter religiously, but not their YouTube channel or podcast, at least frequently. And I'm sure there's other people, but it's kind of like the rising tide lifts all boats. And if you can just understand who your audience is and serve them through different mediums, it's a net win for the entire ecosystem. And you can kind of cross promote accordingly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, at the very least, I should be taking some of the podcasts that would do well for this and put the big takeaways. But yeah, I'll study what they do. And that's the Smooth team that helped put that together, right?
Yep.
Yeah, they do a good job. Cool. Well, that's very helpful. Talk a bit about the vision for Beehive in terms of like where you see this going, at scale. What does it look like? Where do you see it evolving? You guys are shipping a lot. You just shipped something this week. Feel free to plug. Why don't you share more about that?
Yeah. So because you mentioned we just shipped a web builder feature, which is really exciting because that's something that I think I initially assumed incorrectly and has changed over the course of the business. Our initial stance on the website was similar to Substack and other platforms in the space. If you're collecting emails, you need a web presence, we have already consolidated 6 or 7 different pieces of software. So why not offer a minimalist website that people can drive traffic to collect emails, show your archive of content. And then obviously when you publish a post, it goes both web and email simultaneously. But we never wanted to compete with a Webflow or a WordPress, like multi-billion-dollar platforms who specialize just in web building and have been doing it for years or decades. But what we've actually noticed is it's actually one of the stickiest features that we offer. And it makes sense. It's kind of like your homepage, like for everything you do related to this media property, and having a website that looks good, that reflects well on your brand, that you're proud to send the link to friends, colleagues, family. It's like a very big sticking point and something that people, if we cannot offer a great solution, end up spending more time and money with a separate platform. So we've invested many months in building our own web builder that isn't one-to-one with a WordPress or a Webflow, but it is moving in that direction where we can be the one-stop shop for anyone who is building a media property online and can integrate with everything you would need to host your content, collect emails, and then build custom web pages as well. The reason I took advantage of you allowing me to plug the new drop today is because I think it speaks to like the vision of where we are going. I think there is what I would call like dozens of legacy incumbent like email 1.0 platforms from a Aweber, MailChimp, Constant Contact, ActiveCampaign, just to name off all of our competitors. And like they have been around for decades and have more or less either been post-acquisition moving very slowly or not really pushing the boundaries of what's possible with email and newsletters and combining that with growth tools, monetization tools. And so that is like the immediate and short term like opportunity that I see. It's taking a medium and email that almost every business, whether you are a content creator and journalist, or you are a barbershop who emails updates and schedules and things happening in the community to your customers, almost every business sends emails. And I think we can do that better in a more intuitive, simple to use, innovation forward type platform. And that is like the immediate opportunity. And that's like step one is build a software platform that can do email better than anyone else. Step two, we have also already started on in parallel, but it's, can we actually help these people build real sustainable businesses on the backs of our growth and monetization? And so the ad network, for example, is what I think is a multi-billion-dollar bet to be able to speak to any brand who is advertising on Facebook, Google, Instagram, but also allocate budget to email as a channel, knowing that we can get their brand in front of their target customer across thousands of different newsletters that perform extremely well. And I think that is a separate multi-billion-dollar bet to build a scaled ad network for email as a medium. What makes my job hard is we are doing essentially two different but related multi-billion-dollar bets at once. It's one is just a massive SaaS platform that is more functional than the other existing competitors, and the other is a totally different business model to serve almost any advertiser in the world and the media properties that are using us to be able to monetize.
So so less Substack, more MailChimp.
So it's funny because when we first launched, and part of it was timing, part of it was narrative, everyone just viewed us as like, hey, they are a Substack competitor. I don't really view them as like one of our main competitors. I think they are going after like a very narrow audience. They're building their own social media platform. They're pushing people onto their app with their branding where they own the communication and the data. Like I think they are making a lot of very intentional decisions to build a platform and a content medium that they are very opinionated about, where we are kind of the opposite of, I'm not super opinionated about your business model, how you monetize, how you grow, what data you're looking for, how you style things. We want to build something that is flexible enough to support any type of writer, any business, any publisher to build a business how they want to build. And we want to facilitate that and make it as easy as possible without being incredibly opinionated to get in the way of those decisions.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, they really don't like ads, and if you're building a B2B sort of media company, ads, can make a lot, industry dive. Obviously, is a ad supported business. So, yeah, it's more flexible there. So, yeah, it's interesting. So when you raised a bunch of money, but when VCs had questions about the business, did they originally have questions about TAM, or what were sort of the the skepticism you faced from investors?
Cool. So TAM is probably my least favorite question because it actually is really hard to pinpoint, because email is I think the investors he view this as a Substack 2.0. And like, how big is the market for people who are trying to monetize their email newsletter with subscription? To which I say, I think it's actually larger than they're giving it credit, but it is not a multi-billion-dollar market to disrupt in paid newsletters. So that was initially when we went to market with our seed round. Like, the biggest pushback was, yes, Morning Brew is big. Yes, the Skim is successful. Axios, The Hustle, some of the largest newsletters on Substack. But like, how big is that market? To which, like, we are going much beyond just paid newsletters. We're going beyond just newsletters in general, but email as a channel is really the space we're operating in. And then it's like, email as a channel. Are you competing with the Klaviyo's or anyone who is selling anything online in terms of, I don't know, because there's different types of email. There is content-based emails, which is kind of where newsletters fall under, or just like community notes, events happening, whatever. There are emails for e-commerce and email marketing, which is Mad Happy has a 10% off sale. Like, take advantage of these shirts or like new crew necks. And so that's like email marketing. And then there's like transactional email, which is you created a mobile app, and when someone forgets their password or signs up and registers, like, you're sending API-based email that due to like a transaction that had occurred on like an app or a website or elsewhere. So those are kind of like the three different buckets that I view email. We are not doing all three of them right now. We are very focused on content-based emails. But yeah, that's always a pretty big point of pushback of like, how big is email? And I'd argue of like all of the email incumbent players that I named earlier, it's probably 15 to 25 billion in annual revenue just going to them. And that doesn't even include like a Salesforce or a HubSpot kind of CRM type of software for where email and the marketing cloud is pretty important. So that was always a big pushback. And then once we got past that, the big bet that we really are doing is like the ad network, I think, is an absolute game changer of a business for brands to be able to tap into these niche media properties, and for these niche media properties or large media properties to be able to monetize, and us to sit on top of that and take a transaction fee on all of that. To just like an example, if Morning Brew is making $100,000 per newsletter each day, if we were the ones in this hypothetical situation serving that ad and taking a 30% cut of revenue, that's $30,000 a day from just Morning Brew as a customer. Huge hypothetical, but if you get enough medium to large newsletters, you have the volume of a Morning Brew going through our platform every day, which we've already surpassed. So that's kind of like the direction and opportunity that I see with the ad network. And then depending on what stage investors you're talking to, the pushback is, yes, but like, that doesn't exist, and how hard is that to build? To which I say, that's your job as a seed investor to make a bet on something that doesn't yet exist, and you get, more upside for taking that bet before it exists. But those are kind of like the different pushbacks. I'd say like TAM, and then building something that kind of like doesn't exist now, it's hard to pattern match. And so that's why I am extremely happy and fortunate that we have investors who get it, believe in me, believe in the team. But yes.
Yeah. We briefly, we'd invested in SwapStack, which you guys acquired, which was trying to build this ad network. And I always thought, hey, this is a no-brainer. Why does this not exist? So it's amazing that you guys are going to give it the resources for it to, for it to exist at scale. It seems like we want it to exist in podcasting too. But newsletters seems even easier, given how easy it is to do attribution, and you guys own the platform, so insertion will be easy too. Sounds like a massive opportunity.
Yeah, it kind of feels like you're a quasi an investor for us then, if that's the case.
Exactly.
But I mean, you've seen it done with kind of Spotify as well, right? So Spotify has invested a ton in podcasting and audio. They acquired Anchor, which is another company that helps connect different brands and advertisers intermediately into the different podcast feeds. The thing that's hard about podcasts, which I'm sure you're aware of, is like attribution is very difficult, relying on like codes and impressions and downloads, and it's fairly opaque, which is both an opportunity for anyone kind of operating in the audio space to be able to build a solution there, but also a limitation, and something that I think emails and newsletters have a pretty distinct advantage for being able to properly attribute, the different ad spend and success. Same with like pixels and everything too, right? So we are like very early on in the roadmap of what I think is possible with this ad network. I could talk for 3 hours of like the roadmap and how advanced it can get, from one email going out and having dozens of different ads being sent in a single email, depending on who the recipient is, to using pixels, to optimizing, to using AI and machine learning. There's like a lot there. So I'm like very, very optimistic and bullish on the ad network.
And why is it MailChimp a comp again, given how big they are and how noticeable they are in people's minds?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, good.
when you think email, I think most people, small, medium size businesses, think MailChimp. They've been around since I think early 2000s or late 1990s. Like they have the brand name, the reputation. They're huge. They're doing $1 billion-ish in revenue a year. So definitely a comp in terms of like how big can the market be for people sending email and a platform and a SaaS platform being able to facilitate that, aggregate content and send it and deliver it to people's inboxes. MailChimp, for those who don't know, has been acquired by Intuit, I think 3 or 4 years ago, a pretty large acquisition. But from what I can tell from their recent feature launches, which are few and far between, because they are a post-acquisition, like behemoth of a company, is like pushing more people into the Intuit ecosystem, which is taxes, payroll, understanding the problems of a small, medium-sized business. That is very different incentives and features and problems than we are trying to solve. So from where I stand at a 10,000 foot view relative to their business, that's kind of like what I've been able to observe and where we're winning a lot of pretty key customers from their user base.
Yeah. Why raise money at all, or raise more money? How do you think about, given that you guys are making such good revenue? How do you think about the balance between how much to raise, how much not to raise, et cetera?
Yeah, it's funny because my shtick has always been like kind of anti VC, but after raising 3 times, I feel like I kind of lose the ability to make that my shtick. Anti VC, not because I don't like VCs, because fundamentally what I want to do is be able to solve a problem, charge for that problem, and build a profitable business where there is no pressure or runway to have to monitor in terms of we need to be profitable to be able to make the hires. We want to be default alive as a business. And so we've always centered around break even profitability, and we've operated pretty close to break even throughout the duration of the business. To answer when we initially decided to raise money, which was kind of at the very beginning, it was we were young in our careers, didn't have like tons of capital to rely on. And some of the immediate blockers were we needed an email platform. Like we are built on top of SendGrid, which is actually a lot of ESPs are built on top of these ESPs, like a SendGrid. And to get what we needed, it was like a large annual commitment up front. We had a few engineering hires that we needed to make very early on, like our CTO. We had our own salaries. Like there were certain things that were just kind of blockers of like kind of time and place of where we were in our career and the type of vendors that we needed to commit to, which was a $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 upfront payment. Raising a seed round was kind of a necessity to get us off the ground, make a few hires, payroll, whatever. And then the goal was really just to get to profitability and break even as quickly as possible. And we've operated there, but we're also operating in a very competitive landscape. And you start to see different cracks or things of, yes, I think we could build that in 8 months, but it would be a lot more competitively placed if we could offer that to our users in 2 months, which is something that would be unique just to us. And the difference in those 6 months is the ability to raise maybe a bit more capital, to make a few more hires and front load your hiring, to have more product and engineering and design resources. And so you run into a few of those, or like even more recent examples of, as an email platform, like spam, security, risk is like very top of mind, and being able to prevent that from happening on the platform and making sure that everything is compliant and that people are abiding by like different spam and compliance rules and things for the purpose of the ecosystem. And so like that's like an entire team of spam and security that we just didn't have, that required hiring 3, 4, 5 different people to be able to fill those gaps. And so the classic thing that I think anyone who's built a business can relate to is, as you continue to grow and scale, more and more things pop up of we are either considerably understaffed or we would put ourselves at a considerable disadvantage if we don't proactively hire to build and address those things sooner than later. And after running through a few of those, you end up raising capital a few times.
Yeah, totally. So we've gearing towards closing here. You've given a few examples of people who've built, pretty, noteworthy newsletters worth studying. You mentioned Colin and Samir. You mentioned the Milk Road. Who are other examples or case studies on Beehive that you think listeners who are trying to build their own newsletter empire should be studying?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like diverse ones in the sense that, like the Morning Brew playbook is great. It's a news aggregator that is sponsored by a premium sponsor, and that's how they monetize and grow. Arnold Schwarzenegger also has a newsletter on Beehive, which is interesting because like he's in a different game. He's not looking to monetize everything with premium ads. He has an app, he has a book, he has a podcast. Like he is using his newsletter to educate and inform his followers and push them down funnel to download the app, to listen to the podcast, whatever else. Friday Beers, which maybe you follow them on Instagram, hilarious content. They did what is actually, I view, fairly difficult for being like that type of like humorous content that's built for like a TikTok and Instagram, and being able to translate it into what I think is an incredible like 10 out of 10 newsletter. That's like a recap of funny news. It kind of feels like early Barstool days of like the type of news that they're covering and the recaps, with like incredible commentary that TikTok and Instagram doesn't really lend itself to providing this type of written commentary. They have like a very excellent newsletter. And then also leverage. There are certain companies and brands that have an advantage as a business where offering merch isn't always readily available to a journalist who writes about sports or politics. But if you are Friday Beers and you have an entire merch store, not only can you build on the backs of that, like you can launch a referral program where at 3 or 5 referrals, you get 50% off merch or like a free t-shirt or whatever else. And then there's just like larger type businesses who aren't media first or email first, but leverage newsletters incredibly well to engage their audience. So Rally Road and StockTwits are two kind of like finance based both apps, but have an incredible routine Monday through Friday newsletter that informs their audience, educates them with the end goal in mind. Again, isn't to monetize the newsletter per se, although I think they do. It's to be top of mind as a brand, to provide value, to drive people back to the app, to increase usage. So I think those are the examples that kind of show like the breadth of what you can do on the platform, but even the breadth of email as a channel. It doesn't have to be follow the playbook of write an incredible story, get a premium sponsor, monetize with ads, and then continue to grow the newsletter. But you can push app downloads, podcasts, merch, and everything else and engage your audience. And I think that's what's pretty interesting to me.
Yeah. We can attest our first company newsletter is an AI newsletter called Emergent Behavior, and it's on Beehive, and we're excited to do more. But partially, thanks to your advice on what types of things we should be doing. Tyler, thank you so much for coming on Media Empires and sharing your story with Morning Brew and even further out with Beehive. It's pretty amazing what you've built, and I get the sense it's just the beginning.
Very much just the beginning. We launched this 2 years ago, and I think there's a long way to go. So if you don't already try the platform, definitely give it a try. Beehiiv.com. We don't know how to spell. It's BEEHIIV.com.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Tyler.
Appreciate it.